As we read the Christmas story, the nativity story, the lead up to it, the prophetic stuff around it, leading up to it from the Old Testament writers that talked about what was going to happen and what was going to come, it did not look like tradition. It did not look like what would be picked from the religious elite of the day. It wasn't what we would write in a story. It was the least likely from A to Z. And as we dive into it, there are some themes that keep popping up that I think are important. I touched on them last week, but they are very important that we get down into the depths of our soul. Now, I know, as I said last week, there are a myriad of thoughts around Christmas in this room. Some of you read these stories, and you believe every single word and believe that it happened exactly the way it's written. And that's great. That is wonderful. Some of you think some of it's metaphorical. There are some people in this room that think it's just a story, like any other story. You say, well, how can they be in church and be Christians? Well, they can still connect to God and divine principles, and yet not quite, have taken these stories word by word. And as we know, Jesus talked in parables a lot, and there's a lot that is metaphorical in the Bible. Well, which is it, Pastor Dan? I don't know. At the end of the day, it's beautiful, it's powerful, and if we take it to heart and live it and let it inspire us, it will do something that I believe that God has commanded us to do, which is rise up to who we've been called and created to be and impact the world with his love and joy and light. Amen, church? So no matter where you are in that spectrum, and the reason I always say that is because there are a lot of thoughts in this room. One of the beautiful things about this church is that we champion people to think for themselves. We don't demand they buy into everything that we say. We want them to think for themselves and develop their own, work out their own salvation. And it doesn't have to look or be like this exactly. Oh my gosh, yes, I forgot. There's two things we need to do. We're gonna do it at the end. Do not, if you don't absolutely have to be somewhere, do not leave, because there's two very important things that we want to do for our community here that I'll do at the end. Mary and Joseph, let's take them. Mary and Joseph faced three things. They faced rejection, they faced judgment, and they faced a great risk. And when we look at them, we'll realize that there's a lot that they can relate in their story in life to any of us that have ever felt marginalized for one reason or another. They dealt with the fear of judgment. And I want to kind of do some opposites here, because anytime we have a fear of judgment, the remedy for the fear of judgment is the courage to claim our own identity. When you're feeling judged, knowing who you are is the cure to the judgment. It's not defensiveness, it's not fighting back, it's not attacking the other person. It's not hiding and running away or isolating. It's actually grounding yourself and reminding yourself who you are. And the way that looks here is this. If we look at their story, many people, whether you're a person of color, or a person with a disability, a person that's a part of the LGBT community, a person that's just been ostracized from your family, a person that's left another denomination, somebody who's been cast aside or rejected in any way, shape, or form, we experience societal judgment, we experience shame, we experience rejection due to lots of circumstances. And if you look at the story of Mary and Joseph, we see those things in particular. One of the verses I read last week says that the messenger or the angel spoke to her and immediately reassured her to have no fear. Mary finds herself in fear. Fear of what? Fear of judgment. How am I going to explain this? I know how I can explain it, right? Chips, gummy bears, bad decisions. And this is me sucking it in. But she's like, how am I going to explain this? And the angel of the Lord visits her. And I want you to see this combination because it's so vital for our lives. Has anyone ever felt the fear of judgment? What's going to happen if people know X? Marriage coming to an end. How you love, who you love. I'm moving away. I'm switching careers. maybe I got a DUI. Whatever it is that people face day in and day out. I terminated a pregnancy. There's lots of things that we are worried about people finding out, and the fear of judgment is so strong and real. And it will devastate people's lives, sometimes till the day they go on, they pass on. Never releasing its grip on our lives. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much help and therapy and guidance we have, there's always some semblance, some slice of us that worries about what people think. And we can get healthy with it and we can get free of it, but it's so hard to get to a place where you absolutely 100% don't care what anybody thinks. And we might say it, but at the end of the day, there's always somebody, something, that their opinion of us, our decisions, our life, our mistakes matters. And here Mary's like, how am I going to explain this? And I want you to see the remedy that God sends through the angel. The angel says, fear not, for God is head over heels in love with you. Or in another version that's more familiar to you, but I like that one, it's simply this. It is, God has shown favor to you, or the favor of God is upon you. In other words, in a moment of fear where you're worried about what people think, let me show you how God thinks about you. Let me restore your identity or remind you of your identity as a favored one. And the remedy to the fear of rejection in our lives, or the fear of judgment in our lives, is always reminding us that in the middle of it, that no matter what people find out about us, no matter what we end up exposing about our lives to the people around us, whether we make that decision or not, at the end of the day, it does not change who you are. Mary coming forward with the fact that she's pregnant with child, although we know it wasn't out of wedlock or with Joseph, according to the story, and we have a theory about that, but we're going to get into that another year. It's going to take about 5 more years to get there. But we realize that this fear in this moment could only be solved with reminding Mary that no matter who talked behind her back or had an opinion of what happened or how this happened, it did not change the fact that she was favored by God. Because church and faith and religion oftentimes uses God's opinion and favor of you synonymous with the opinion and favor of people. And the two of them are in no way linked. That, if you can break that chain in your life right now, most of us, we'd put these two out of business. No, I'm just kidding. We don't want to do that. But if we can, that's right. If we can just separate people's opinion from God's opinion and realize that oftentimes when people have the worst opinion of you is when God shows up to remind you that his favor and design and identity has not changed. I mean, some of the loudest times in my life that I feel like I've heard God's assurance over who I am is when people had the worst opinions of me. And it's weird because you're like hearing all the stuff and then you just feel God say like, no, I've got something really good for you to do. I put something inside of your being, your heart, your mind that no one else has. And you're like, now, Lord? Really? Right? And I also think we're more primed to hear it when we're feeling the fear of judgment. Because when everything's great and somebody says, great job, you're like, I know. Right? But in that moment, God has a way of reminding us, and usually it's through another person. I hate to say it, but it's true. It's through another person that comes up to you and says, hey, I know you're probably feeling a lot of things, but I just want to tell you, like, something you said or did or whatever impacted my life, it changed forever. And you're like, wow. And I could have only heard it from you. Okay, no one else ever did that for me. Oh, okay. And all of a sudden, the judgment of all the other people or the the thoughts of judgment, the expectation of judgment begins to dissolve and go away. Just by one moment where you're reminded of who you are. Nothing changes of who you are just because something has happened that might be difficult to explain to the people around you. I think there's some people in this church that need to hear that. You haven't changed. You've always been you. People might discover something new about you. You might let them in on another part of who you are, but you have never changed. You're the same you. That's good to know this morning. Clap, 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 clap. All right. But the messenger says, God is head over heels in love with you, for this is your moment to discover how favored you have always been. That's the key. This is actually, the word here is in that aorist tense, which means it's something that's happened in the past that is still active today and will be active forever. And so that tense we don't have in the English language. It was in the ancient Greek. It's called aorist, A-O-R-I-S-T. You have like the present aorist tense. You have a couple different versions of that. But it is a word that says you have been favored, you are favored, you will be favored. You have been valuable, you are valuable, and you will be valuable. So in the moment that you're scared to reveal to something that you're worried about someone's going to judge you about, whether you decide to tell them or not, you're valuable. And when it comes out of your mouth, you're valuable. And the aftermath of it, you're still valuable. Your value doesn't change because somebody found out a new piece of who you are. That's important to know. And when we're on our journey of like being more authentic with one another, even in this room, just know that anybody that changes how they treat you because they've learned a new part of who you are, they don't get it. They're missing the point because you haven't changed. Their capacity to embrace who you are is what needs adjusting, not you as a person. Do you hear me today? So we need to work, if we have a problem with judging people and marginalizing people because they're being more authentic with us, then we need to adjust our capacity to embrace differences, to embrace people's unique identities and them being authentic with us. And sometimes our authenticity with one another challenges our own authenticity. And so we will condemn or treat somebody differently because we're worried we're next on the authenticity list. And that's not how it works, because you have the free will to be authentic when you want to. So if I'm authentic with you, it doesn't mean you have to be authentic with me, but I'm hoping one day you watch how I'm treated in this community and realize that you can be authentic too, because hopefully you're going to be treated the same way. Folks, that's how we build a community with one another that cannot be stopped. That's how we build a community with one another that will not be hurt, that will not be damaged, that will not be a place where people walk away with wounds. Can you imagine if we built the first church in America here together, that people don't leave here with wounds from the church? You say, how do you know that's not out there? It ain't out there. There's not a church, and I don't think we're there yet. But there's not a church in America that people aren't leaving with wounds. Can you imagine if we got to a place where we created such an authentic environment where we know who we are as a person and we know no matter what we say or what we divulge to one another in a safe place that we will not be judged or treated differently because of it. But that is in the Christmas story. So don't sing the carols and ring the bells and deck the halls or whatever we do, hang the mistletoe, and miss one of the most important parts of the story, which is a scared teenage girl who is thinking, I'm going to be stoned in the street. And in a moment, God says, in the middle of the worst fear of your life, let me tell you who you are. That's what the body of Christ is supposed to look like. It doesn't, but it should. And Harvest, gosh darn it, we're trying. Do you hear me today? I can't tell you how many times I've been up here and I've said something out of my mouth about my own life, and I thought to myself later, you shouldn't have said that. You maybe shouldn't have said that. And I can tell you, there's even more times where maybe my mom was like, you shouldn't have said that. But at the end of the day, if somebody leaves and they go, I can't believe Pastor Dan's been through this and that's happened and what this and that and whatever, I'm leaving. It's not actually a me problem. It's their capacity to both embrace that all of us have a different journey and also probably their own fear of what if I was that authentic? If this place here is built on a principle of that guy can stand up there and be that authentic, then I'm guessing they're expecting me to do the same thing. And that is scary for people because their experience with authenticity has usually reinforced their fear of judgment. We want to change that. Do you hear me? Community-wise, we want to change that people's experience with authenticity is not judgment. It's, oh, okay, you know what? Thank you for sharing. Now I know a little bit more about who you are. Yeah. By the way, I know you're trying to get to Puerto Rico for your dad's funeral in a couple weeks. We as a church are going to pay for it. I know I mentioned that to you before service. We're going to pay for it. These guys are going to come up with some money, and if they don't, I'll rob one of Aaron's accounts, okay? We will pay for it. We want you to get there for your dad's. Don't you think she should be able to go to Puerto Rico for her dad's funeral? And not because, you mismanage your money or anything like this. You work hard. You do the right thing with your money. It's not about that. It's about these things pop up in our lives. You're young. My parents were at least around to help me in situations like this when I was your age. And you don't have that same luxury. Your dad's passed on. So we're going to be your moms and dads around here and make sure you get to Puerto Rico. And we want you to have a little money in your hands so that you can go. You're not walking around broke, okay? Amen. So we're going to book a ticket after service. Yeah? Cool? Is that cool? Awesome. Right, church? We want to do that for her, right? She volunteers at least 2 weeks a month to come up here and sing her heart out. She's a volunteer. She's blessed so many of you over and over again. It's time that we stand up and bless her. And we're going to help one more family, but I'm not going to tell you who they are because I don't want to embarrass them. I knew Anna could take it, all right? The shepherds. I'm going to do this. It doesn't really matter if I get to 11:30 and I'm not done. That's okay because I can hold it over to next week. It's all good. The shepherds. The shepherds were both unseen and excluded. They were both unseen and excluded. I know that every person in this room at one time or another has felt unseen and excluded. And when you look at the shepherds, they were laborers on the fringes of society. It wasn't the job you picked. It was like the default, the bottom of the totem pole. They were excluded from religious and societal circles, and yet they were the first to hear of Christ's birth. It's funny because one of the pictures that we see of Jesus is him as a shepherd, the great shepherd. And yet shepherds, if there was an equivalent in our society, and I don't even want to say anything because there might be people that do those jobs in this room, and but the shepherds were it was a below minimum wage job. It was a dirty, nomadic, didn't know where they were going to eat, where they were going to stay. It was smelly. It was, they couldn't build wealth. They were oftentimes like slaves because a lot of times one rich person would own a bunch of sheep and they would hire these shepherds to tend the sheep. They didn't even usually own what they were tending to. It was just a really low part of society, and they were unseen. They wouldn't even be oftentimes welcome to walk into the city. They would be on the city gates. Somebody would come and receive the sheep and bring them into the city, whether it was for wool or meat or sacrifice. And they were rough. They were really rough. They were at the lowest class of society. And when we see, it really actually for them wasn't about them being different. See, the Magi, who I'm going to finish with, were different because they were people of another faith from another land. The shepherds were oftentimes still the same ethnicity and faith. It wasn't that they were different, but they were under systematic oppression. The system oppressed them because of what they did. Usually they came from families who had never had an opportunity to study in a synagogue or learn a higher calling or a higher profession. They were the people that were living with nowhere to live, picking up their tent stakes. They're still nomadic people in those areas to this day. So they were oppressed by the system. There were rules about where they could go and where they couldn't go. There was a gate, and you can still see it to this day in Jerusalem, they called the sheep gate. And people think that's because that's where they brought the sheep in, but it's also the only gate the shepherds could come in. So they weren't even allowed to walk through the gates that everyone else was allowed to walk through. So it was systematic oppression. It was the system keeping people down. We see that all the time in our system. People that just, we don't, I mean, nowadays it's not even less necessarily the poorest of the poor. They will oftentimes get help, although not enough. A lot of times it's people that are working 40 hours a week who are still falling deeper and deeper in debt, who can't afford to live here, who end up sometimes with no substance abuse issues or any of the things that derail people even quicker, that will end up living in their car with their child. And we had a lady, we featured her story at the last luncheon, worked for Publix, had a young teenage son or tween son, and working for Publix, I think, for 12 years at that time, and faithful to come to her work every day. And her rent got jacked up, couldn't afford it, got jacked up again, couldn't afford it, took her savings, lived in a pay-by-the-week motel as long as she could, still kept going to work until she was in her car and getting her son and herself ready in a Wawa gas station to go to work and to take her son to school. That's happening right here in Sarasota. And the system is not helping those people. I mean, there are attempts beginning to be made. That's part of what we want to do with the Future of Harvest House, is make sure that people like that also get a hand and an opportunity. And so the systematic oppression, if you've ever made a mistake in your life, you could be 21 years old, you get a felony on your record. That felony follows you for the rest of your life unless you can get it somehow expunged from your record, which takes a lot of money. But in order to have a lot of money, you have to have a good job. In order to get a good job, you can't have a felony. People released from prison, then we tack on, we say, okay, go back into society. You have a record. You can't get hired at certain jobs. And if you are hired somewhere, they hold that against you and pay you less. But then on top of it, we make them pay restitution. And then the restitution keeps them from being able to afford to live anywhere. Then they end up on the streets. They end up committing more crimes because they're trying to live. They get put back in prison, and now they've got points against them, and it racks up and it racks up. There is systematic oppression that happens right here in Sarasota, in Florida, and our country. These were the shepherds. No matter what they do, they couldn't break out of this caste. No matter how hard they worked, they were always going to be this. Their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren were going to be shepherds. But the antidote to systematic exclusion or systematic oppression is the direct invitation from the divine. Do you see this picture here? Here are these people that everybody's like, why would you pick them? And God says, out of all the people I'm going to pick, I'm going to reveal that the Savior of the world is born to them. To the homeless mom with her kid in a car, or the guy released from prison who has a restitution to pay back this high, or the person working 40 hours a week going deeper in debt, not knowing how they're going to get by the next week. That's who God comes to, not the CEOs, not the Wall Street types, not any of those. The ones who are on the fringes and the marginalized parts of society. That's who God reveals himself to. Last thing is this. I'll do this quickly. The Magi. There's more in here, but that's okay. The Magi. The Magi were not systematically excluded. The Magi were outsiders. They didn't belong. Anyone here ever felt like an outsider that you didn't belong? 3 people. Well, in that case, if you're at Harvest, you've probably been kicked out somewhere and this was your last resort. No, I'm just kidding. It's just half of you at least. Or you kicked yourself out and you said, I will never go back to church ever again. That's a great question. How many of you came back to Harvest after you said, I will never go back to church again? Look around the room. Wow, that's amazing. I don't blame you, by the way, for both of them, for both never wanting to go back and for coming back here. But the Magi were foreigners. They were cultural and religious outsiders who recognized Jesus when the religious elite did not. They saw something that the ones that should have seen it couldn't see it. There's something about the people that have been on the outside that see some things that those of us on the inside in a moment cannot see. And so when they saw Jesus, or say saw that star, they knew there was something special, something bringing them. And as I preached last year in my Underdogs of Christmas series, they were probably using devices that looked like Ouija boards to navigate. They were people that used astrology and Eastern religion to navigate and recognize that something that is going to change history is over there, and we're going to go honor it. It's why we can never, ever, 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 ever think that we have it all together and nobody else has anything to bring to the table because we have a lock on faith. It's why there's people in this church who have all sorts of ideas about God and faith and the world. All sorts. If I said some of them to you, you're like, Pastor Dan, you should probably talk to them. No, because each one of them are valuable. All right? I know some of you wild wonder people go out and talk to trees. I've gotten reports back. The question is, do the trees talk back? KK says sometimes. And so you know what? That's valuable. When they stop talking back, stop talking to the trees, okay? But whatever it may be, how they connect, you're telling me that these magi who practice this Eastern religion, probably on something that looked like a Ouija board, navigating to this star, bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh, each one of them representing something beautiful about the foretelling of Jesus to come. They come to the table with their gifts. They come to the stable and they bring them, and they honor the king in a way that is now recorded and demonstrated throughout history. We don't even know the names of the religious elite. We don't know who was running the most famous temple in Jerusalem during that time. We don't know the grand priest or the great rabbi of that time. We don't know any of their names, but we know and talk about these three guys practicing another religion from another land who had been outside, who didn't belong, who came to honor the king. We don't know the names of the politicians at the time. We know that there were shepherds on the outside of society who had been oppressed by the system, who were the first to know that there's been a Savior born. And we don't even know much about Mary. But we know there was a scared, probably teenage girl who was afraid that she'd be stoned in the square and afraid that she would be judged because of the promise that she was carrying inside of her that delivered the one that would change everything. I don't know what you're facing this morning. If you're worried about people's judgment, if you've been systematically oppressed, if you feel like an outsider, you don't belong, or a combination of them, or if you've experienced that in your life. But the truth is if you've ever experienced any of that or you're experiencing it now, you're primed to be a part of something great. Yep. You're probably going to be somebody that's selected to do something really wonderful that could change history. God calls the outsiders, the excluded, the oppressed, the people that don't fit in, the weirdos, the wackos. And I'm not saying you're weird and wacko, I'm saying I am. I will tell you this. The other day I was around somebody who is a part of the show that I'm in at the UTC. It's actually Nick's wife. And I said to her about somebody else in the cast, I said, they're kind of strange, they're kind of odd. So I think they're great, but they're a little odd. And she said, circus people are odd. And I said, yeah, I get that. And then she looked me, she's about like yay big, I swear. No, she's very petite, and she's about this tall. And she gets real close, and she looks straight up at me. She said, you know, you're odd. I don't think I've had anybody just look me in the eyes and say, you're odd. But what's this mumbling old man behind me saying? I'm gonna kick your cane out, okay, from underneath you. But I was like, I just looked at her and I go, you're right. We're all odd, but odd is good in the things of the divine. You've got something unique about you and wonderful, and probably the reason that many of us have been excluded or on the outside. Many of us feel like we'll be judged for something that we, or maybe have even been oppressed or excluded by the system, is because we carry something that people don't quite understand. Yeah. Like, I always think about you. I really do, because you're just you. You are zany and wacky and brilliant and all sorts of stuff. He does like moon ceremonies. You do. I'm just going to say it. You do moon ceremonies, right? And you brew a specialty. And I'm going to be honest with you, 15 years ago, we would have thought you were demonic. Am I telling the truth, Angie? We would have been like, he needs a demon cast out of him. And yet, you walk in here shining the light of God every time you walk in here. You are a beautiful soul who loves to help people and look out for people and stick up for people. You're a wonderful human being who, even when you come and hug me, and you'll just come right up and hug me. Besides the fact I realize I am never going to be as good looking as you, when you hug me, I just feel good. I feel joy. And we would have excluded you not too long ago. You would have been seen as an outsider. We would have talked behind your back. We said, oh yeah, that's Howling at the Moon Steve, or we've come up with a nickname for you, right? But you are a beautiful human being who has learned to bring the things of God into your heart and into your life and to people around you to connect with them. We wouldn't have got like, why do they have to drink tea? Who cares? They like it. They enjoy it. Why do you drink coffee? Why do you drink tea? Right? We just couldn't get past that kind of stuff. But this story, if we read it right, makes us embrace things that also bring value into our community that we would have missed. Yeah. We would have missed so much of it. Will you stand up? Is it okay that I did that? All right. Also, hit him up for his moon ceremonies if you want to. That's true. I wish Merle was here because I would have made fun of her too, okay? Not made fun, actually highlighted the beautiful diversity of who we are in a loving way. Father, today we are grateful for your reassurance through this story. There is a miracle that happened, I believe, so many years ago, but I also believe there are miracles that are happening now. And as we embrace the next couple of weeks and all that comes with it, and the good and the bad, the zany, the crazy, the dramatic, whatever it may be, let us be reminded that each one of us carry a miracle. We carry a miracle with us. We do. We carry a miracle that may not be understood. People might have judged it. People might exclude us, oppress it, but it doesn't change who we are because we carry a miracle. And let those that leave here today feel that and know that they're special. They carry something so good. They carry the divine. They carry the same promise that drew people to that star in the birth of a Savior. They carry that same promise inside of them. I thank you, Father, for that.